Welcome to this explainer. Today we are looking at a truly defining moment in history. Think of American capitalism as standing squarely at a massive, complicated crossroads. Over the past few generations, this economic engine has produced unimaginable technological advances, skyrocketing living standards, and just incredible wealth. But right now, we're facing three critical paths. Down one road is historic opportunity, the chance to harness breathtaking innovations to build widely shared prosperity. But down the others, deep potholes and potential wrong turns that could define the livelihoods of future generations for decades to come. So today, we're going to explore the map of these crossroads, directly sourced from recent, rigorous economic analysis.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our literal map for the journey ahead. We'll start with capitalism at a crossroads, then weigh redistribution versus growth, look at walls versus bridges, explore regulation versus competition, and finally, wrap up with visionary leadership.
Section 1. Capitalism at a Crossroads and the Diminishing American Dream. Let's look at why there's such widespread economic anxiety today.
On the surface, it feels like the American economy is roaring, right? We've got AI and clean tech innovations happening everywhere, but underneath that shiny surface, there's a widening chasm between the economic winners and losers, and it's leading to deep distrust. Take a look at a typical median male full-time worker in 2025. His weekly paycheck is about $1,325. Now, adjusted for inflation, that is exactly the same as what his counterpart earned way back in 1979. We're talking about nearly half a century of stagnation for the typical worker. And honestly, this stagnation stings even more today because the perks of wealth are just so highly visible. Middle-class families are constantly confronted by what money can buy, whether it's skipping the lines at Disney parks, breezing through airport security, or funding elite travel sports teams for the kids.
And this stagnation has caused a massive drop in upward mobility. According to Harvard's Opportunity Insights, about 90% of children born in 1945 ended up earning more than their parents did by age 30. That was the dream. But for kids born in 1985, that number has plummeted to just 50%. It is literally a coin toss now as to whether the next generation will actually out-earn the previous one.
Because of that coin toss, a staggering 78% of Americans now completely disagree with the statement that life will be better for their children. And here's why this matters so much. The economic returns for specific talents and assets have absolutely skyrocketed, slicing the pie incredibly unevenly. For instance, the earnings premium that a college graduate enjoys over a high school graduate jumped from 30% to 55% over the last 50 years. And if you look right at the top, the wealthiest 1% of households held almost a third of all wealth as of 2024. This brings us to our first major fork in the road to try and fix this deeply pessimistic outlook.
Section 2. Redistribution or economic growth. Here are the two very different paths proposed to restore prosperity.
So, how do we actually overcome this diminished belief in the American dream? Well, path A is to basically accept dynamic market forces as they currently are, and then aggressively tax the well-off to redistribute the wealth. We're seeing this in proposed policies like California's 5% levy on billionaires, or Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposed 2 to 6% wealth taxes. We even see it in the tech sector, where OpenAI's Sam Altman suggests that an AI-driven future is going to require a universal basic income, or a UBI, as traditional jobs disappear. Now, Path B is entirely different. Instead of rearranging the pieces we already have, it focuses on costly upfront investments in productivity and worker capabilities. The goal here is to expand the entire economic pie from the ground up.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what choosing the growth path actually requires behind the scenes. We would have to reverse a massive, decades-long decline in knowledge creation. Look at this. Federal spending on research and development was 2.8% of the U.S. GDP in 1963. By 2023, it slid to just 0.6%. Reversing this means investing heavily, and not just in tech, but in people. For example, providing $4,000 worth of high-quality early childhood programming to the 25 million kids under 5 in the U.S. would cost $100 billion a year. It sounds super steep, I know, but researchers like Nobel laureate James Heckman have found that these types of investments yield an incredible 7-to-1 return on investment for society. But we have to face the brutal reality of that choice. Choosing growth over redistribution is fundamentally an intergenerational choice. Right now, there is a massive disparity. The federal government currently spends 6 times as much on baby boomers over the age of 65 than it does on young people under 26. So choosing Path B means prioritizing the young over the old, and that is a choice that requires immense political will, especially given our historically large federal debt.
Section 3. Building walls or bridges. This is the second critical choice we are navigating regarding America's global stance. For 80 years, the U.S. led an open global economic order, but today we're seeing a stark divide. Path A favors protectionism. Driven by very valid and thoroughly researched worker anxieties about job losses, the Trump administration launched a barrage of tariffs and immigration restrictions. Path B, on the other hand, argues for building bridges. It's about maintaining global engagement, but pairing it with heavy investments in domestic labor market skills so workers can actually compete and thrive on a global scale. This swing toward walls lately has been dramatic. America's average effective tariff rate on imports is currently hovering around 12%. To put that into perspective, that is 7 times higher than it was just a decade ago. We're nearing levels not seen since the infamous trade-killing Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s. At the same time, net immigration has fallen, and there are proposals out there aiming to build walls against high-talent immigration as well, like slapping a $100,000 fee on H-1B visas. And this brilliantly illustrates the real tension of the global engagement argument. While nativist sentiments are running very strong in both major political parties right now, the data tells a really fascinating story. Globally engaged companies, the ones actively building bridges, actually create the very jobs Americans are yearning for. Look at the compensation gap. Workers at U.S. multinational companies earn an average compensation of over $97,000. That's roughly 20% higher than the rest of the private sector average. So the challenge is figuring out how to engage globally without leaving our domestic workers behind.
Section 4, Regulation versus Free Competition. This brings us to the third and final fork in the road.
So how do we establish the right guardrails? History shows us the pendulum constantly swinging between two very dangerous extremes. On one side, rigid government control creates a fragile, brittle economy that just fails to deliver prosperity. But on the other side, completely unfettered markets become wildly unstable. We obviously want the awesome, creative power of free competition, the exact kind of venture-backed ecosystem that created Silicon Valley, Apple, and OpenAI. But we also desperately need guardrails to keep things on track. Because here's the thing, markets simply cannot entirely self-regulate. To understand the danger of that unfettered extreme, we just have to look back at the 2007 to 2009 global financial crisis. Even Alan Greenspan, the former Federal Reserve chairman and a historically ardent skeptic of regulation, made this startling admission to Congress in 2008. He admitted he made a mistake in presuming that the self-interest of banks was enough to protect their own shareholders and the wider economy. Inadequately supervised markets can completely upend our livelihoods. So what does a sensibly balanced path actually look like? Researchers outline 4 clear guardrail principles. First, we have to fix market failures, like taxing carbon emissions while funding basic R&D. Second, we must actively promote competition by breaking down monopolies. Third, yes, we absolutely regulate for safety, but we also have to regulate for growth. That means fighting the NIMBYism that blocks new housing and clearing those onerous permitting processes that are causing electricity shortages. And finally, number 4, we must avoid crony capitalism. We have to resist the siren calls of industrial policy where the government tries to pick winners and losers, because that often just favors politically connected insiders and squanders taxpayer money.
Finally, Section 5, the call for visionary leadership. Navigating all these potholes and choosing the right paths ultimately requires a unifying story, not just sensible policy execution. If we look back at our history, America has stood at terrifying crossroads before, and we navigated them successfully because visionary leaders emerged to articulate inspiring, unifying visions to the public. In the 1930s, it was FDR with the New Deal. In the 1950s, it was Eisenhower with his Middle Way. Which leaves us right here, looking ahead to 2026 and America's 250th anniversary. The stage is perfectly set. We've explored the massive choices, redistribution or growth, walls or bridges, rigid regulation or balanced competition. The paths are laid out right before us. The only question left is who will step up to lead the world's greatest economy into its next era? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it helps you navigate the crossroads ahead.